Should you rewrite your SaaS product? That's what I'm going to talk about on today's episode and tell you the story of how we created Proposify 2 and the lessons we learned along the way. Hi there, I'm Kyle Racki, and today I'm going to be talking about rebuilding your SaaS product when maybe it's gone out of date or when you want to leverage some new technology. I think this is a problem that a lot of founders come up against at some point in the company's life cycle. And so I want to share with you our experience at Proposify of why we built Proposify 2, a lot of the challenges that we had, and whether or not we would actually do it again if we could turn back time. So first of all, I want to explain why we decided to rebuild the product. You know, we had been going along at a good clip, growing quickly for a couple of years, and we came up to a point where there was a lot of really substantial changes that we wanted to make to the product. For example, a brand new user interface for our text editor. Our CTO, Jonathan, he wanted to leverage new technology in terms of JavaScript framework. So he actually had built his own custom JavaScript framework on his own called Cinder, and he wanted to be able to use that. There was a lot of new technology that we wanted to leverage. So instead of doing it piecemeal, really the only way for us to kind of make all these substantial changes was to literally rewrite the product line by line from the ground up. This is a massive undertaking, and I think that we were naive in thinking that it was going to be a lot faster than it ended up being. So our rationale at the time was that, you know, every product needs to be rebuilt eventually, right? Like the version of Facebook that we're using today is not the one that was originally built by Zuckerberg at Harvard back over 10 years ago. So, you know, every product needs to be rebuilt at some point. And our thinking was that, you know, as technology gets more out of date, as there's newer stuff coming up on the horizon, it just makes sense to rebuild. So we started working on it around the summer of 2016. Jonathan was just getting all the pieces in place to be able to have the rest of our development team start building on it. Now, once we got it underway, we basically held off completely on any more support or features for Proposify 1.0. And actually, there was a lot of new developers who started during that time, so they were only actually trained up in the 2.0 code base. A lot of them had never touched code on 1.0. And as time progressed, as the months rolled by, we realized that this was a much bigger project than we had anticipated, and it took a lot longer to get something up and running. You know, by March of 2017, I was pushing to kind of get something out there and launch, and we realized that it wasn't even close to ready. The end was not even in sight. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. So I think what actually hurt us during this time period was that we weren't building anything for our existing customers because we were focused on this new thing. So I think a lot of people felt like the product had gotten stale. There was a lot of new features that people wanted that we simply couldn't build for them. During that time, we actually took some developers off of 2 to work on some really necessary needed features for 1, which was Stripe payments and being able to organize their pipeline a little bit easier. It did help with a lot of the requests that we were getting, but it was still a fairly small update to Proposify 1 during that time period. And so we were basically in development hell. And we just didn't know how to get out of it because we couldn't release 2.0 prematurely and have a lot of customers experience bugs and issues with it, but we also couldn't pull them off of it to work on 1.0. We had invested so much time and energy in getting 2 out the door, so we were really stuck between a rock and a hard place. There was also a lot of challenges that we had when it came to actually rolling out 2.0. How do you actually get that out the door? Because if we were to just instantly switch it over and have every single customer in our product on 2.0, and then there was some sort of major issue that we hadn't anticipated, it could have been catastrophic to the business. So we really needed a strategy on how to gradually test out 2.0 without instantly rolling it out to our entire customer base. We actually got really good advice from one of our board members, Ben Yoskovitz, who had a 15-minute phone call with our CTO and came away with a really good idea for how to do this. So as it happened during that time, I had bought the domain for proposify.com. We had .biz for a long time, got made fun of on Twitter a lot for it, but we just couldn't buy it because we couldn't find out who actually owned it. It was really difficult. I finally was able to buy the .com, and that was actually a perfect way to segue into 2.0. So we could host Proposify 2 on proposify.com and keep Proposify 1.0 on .biz, if that makes sense. So the idea was that people are still on .biz, all the code for 2.0 is hosted on .com, and then we can gradually roll people over into the new one. So the first way we could test out 2.0 was, instead of actually switching our customers over, was to just have new customers come into a new trial account. So when you start a new free trial at Proposify, the idea was that we wanted a small segment of those people to actually get pushed over into .com, which is the 2.0. So the way we actually did that was using a tool called Visual Website Optimizer, or VWO. And what that lets you do is split tests. So you can say, a certain percentage of traffic that comes to your website, you want them to actually get redirected to a new URL. So what we did was we came up with a deadline to get Proposify 2 ready, as ready as it'll ever be to start testing it out with new customers. Because really, we could keep testing it internally forever, and it may never launch. We needed to get other people using this who had no prior experience with using Proposify to just see, does it work at all? So what we did was we had about maybe 5% of new trial signups get pushed into .com, the 2.0, without even realizing it. And then we monitor their activity to see how they used it. Were they able to send proposals? Did they reach out to support with any bug reports? And what we found over those kind of months at Christmas was that people were coming into it, they were using it, they were getting value of it, and we were starting to even get upgrades to paid accounts. That gave us a pretty good indication that it worked. So we started actually increasing the threshold and pushing more and more people into it. So instead of 5%, maybe it was 20% or 30%. And we did that for a few months. We noticed that the numbers mostly stayed the same. People seemed to like 2.0, and we could eventually make it so that all trials, 100% of new trials went into 2, and then really get a sense of, are we still able to convert this? Now, the real challenge came when it came to migrate existing customers over. And I think this is where we learned a lot of lessons as a company. We have had a lot of meetings to talk about lessons that we learned rolling customers over into it. So the first thing that we did, which I think made a lot of sense, was we made it so there was as little downtime as possible if somebody was getting switched over to 2. So we waited until we could actually put a button within 1.0 to say, I want to switch over to 2, and then put them into kind of a queue to wait getting switched over. And that migration would only take maybe a few minutes, as long as it wasn't a giant account. Once we had that ready, we published a blog post announcing 2.0, all the new stuff that's in it, and we said, go in right now if you want to and request switching over. We didn't want to launch that announcement until it was ready, because people had waited so long for any major updates from us. We didn't want to let them down again. So we did that, and actually we hadn't anticipated how many people wanted to switch over to 2. We thought maybe a handful would, and there was a lot. There was hundreds. So we had to manage that. And one of the biggest mistakes we made was we didn't do a lot of tests with the migrations with real account data. We had done some preliminary tests using fake accounts or fake data, but we didn't make duplicates of our customers' accounts and test it out with theirs. And what we found was that in 1.0, people had done things like hacked fee tables together using, ways the system wasn't really meant to work, just to get it to look or act a certain way. And when it migrated, it just broke all their tables. So it ended up being a huge headache for support. Support was just completely knocked on their ass for weeks, dealing with customer complaints about rolling over to 2.0. In addition to that, large accounts would have taken actually a little bit longer. So large accounts usually line up with our bigger customers that pay us a lot more. We wanted to make sure there weren't problems with those guys. So we actually turned off the ability for them to switch over to 1.0 and just wanted, somebody from customer success to manually reach out to them and do that. Of course, we also got bombarded with a lot of people saying, hey, I can't find the, switch me to 2 button in my account. And it was because we actually turned it off for their account. So that also caused some upset. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of challenges as we were trying to switch this over. So we were stuck between a rock and a hard place. We couldn't do anything really with 1.0. So our NPS scores, our surveys from customers, were saying that the product's stagnant and it hasn't come out with new features. And the NPS scores for 2.0 customers were saying there's bugs, there's been some migration issues. So we really were in a tough spot. And we had planned in Q2 of 2018 to come out with a lot of new features so that we could reach back out to customers and say, look how great 2.0 is. We've got a lot of awesome new stuff that you'd been asking for. But unfortunately, the product was just so unstable that we had to completely scrap those plans and get our developers 100% focused on fixing bugs, which, it sucked. It put us behind schedule on a lot of great things that we wanted to do, but ultimately, I think was the right move. One of the main metrics that we use for our QA team is defect escape rate. And what that means is it's a percentage of how many bugs get reported by customers instead of QA. So the idea is that we want our QA team finding bugs before customers do. So 50% of the bugs that we find are actually from customers reporting them instead of QA. That's a big problem. And our escape rate was really high. So Janani, our head of QA, really wanted to make sure that our defect escape rate was below 10% before we put a push on any new features. So that's what we did. We really just put our head down and worked, and our marketing team, came up with a communication strategy to make sure that we were communicating properly with customers and minimizing any of the damage that we were experiencing. One of the things that I think we would do differently if we could turn back time and do it over again was we didn't actually create a way for people to roll back from 2.0 to 1. That would have taken weeks more of effort to be able to actually have people migrate backwards. And it was something that we didn't think was really necessary. So we told people up front, look, if you switch over to 2, there's no going back. And when we started to experience bugs and issues with people's accounts migrating, it would have been really handy to be able to just switch them back to 1.0 and have everything be right again. So I think if we were to do things over, we definitely would have allowed people to roll back to 1. So obviously there was a lot of lessons that we experienced with rebuilding our product. I want to leave a few takeaways and a few final thoughts on things that we learned with this 2.0 build. One was that when you're creating or envisioning a project that you think is really large and you can't fit into, say, a small 6-week window, if you think it's going to take longer than that, the project is too big and you have to find a way to split it up. If it's a black box and nobody knows how long it's going to take and it's done when it's done, you could be in a position like this where something you thought might only be 6 months to do ends up being 2 years. If you're already through this process, or if you're already in the middle of it, you really need to be patient and let things take their time. It's difficult to, take almost time out of the game to build a 2.0 product when, competitors around you are building new features and coming out with new things. But we were at a point where, there was just no way to, other than standing over developers and cracking a whip, which we don't think would have been very effective. It's almost like building a house. It's going to take the time it takes, and there's no way to make it go faster. And you don't want to rush it ahead too quickly, where you could experience some of the rollout issues that we had. The other thing is that and maybe a reason against doing any kind of major rebuild of your product is that when you're in this sort of development hell, it's actually a really big loss of morale with your team. We had developers who were working for the company for over a year who none of their code had ever actually gone live. No customer had ever interacted with something they built because they were on this giant project the whole time. Customer support experiencing morale issues with the bug reports, marketing not really having anything new in the product to talk about and to get customers excited about. So, when you undertake a big project like this, it takes a big hit on people's enthusiasm in a lot of different departments. If I could go back in time and do it over again, probably wouldn't have done it because of all these issues that I talked about. But looking forward, and now that we actually have it out, we're actually really glad that Proposify 2 is out. it is a better product, and we're working hard to clean up the bugs, make it faster and smoother, and we've got some incredible new features and new improvements to it. So we are excited about it. But if you're a SaaS founder and you're considering doing a major rebuild, this should give you some pause before jumping into it. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lifetime Value. I'm Kyle Racki, and thanks for joining me.
This episode of Lifetime Value is brought to you by Proposify. Proposify improves sales productivity so your team spends less time creating proposals and more time selling. Start your free trial at proposify.com. And be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a single episode.